Evening. This is the August edition of the Focus Nation Africa series, and it's a series that we have put together at the Difference newspaper to draw attention and to educate ourselves as a people in this part of the continent about issues in the continent. And so once every month we sit down and we discuss issues from the point of view of one nation in the continent. Today it's Cote d'Ivoire, and we'll be discussing issues as they have to do with Cote d'Ivoire, as they have to do, which is marking its independence. Today it's became independent on this day, August 7th, 1960, a few days before Nigeria, where we are. So we take it in that order. We're going to discuss Cote d'Ivoire. We're going to see issues, how they are faring, what they are doing. And it's interesting because we are talking at a time when the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has just come into effect, which means that from a business and economy point of view, the continent has achieved the beginning of a dream that its founding fathers have worked on for many, many years. We're talking about the need for economic integration, of the continent of Africa. And now we are at the threshold where different peoples, different countries, different organizations are trying to now find out how best, we can drive the African dream in terms of getting more prosperity, creating wealth, and ensuring that the diversity of Africa is properly, harnessed so that everybody would get better, in the process. So that's where we are. Mr. Tony Opara is our principal discussant. One or two others will join in as the session goes on. But we'll begin with him, and he will give us an overview of the situation as it has to do with Cote d'Ivoire, statistics, facts, and first impressions about Cote d'Ivoire in the context of the continent. So, Tony, you're welcome.
Thank you, Richard. Let's say happy birthday to Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire is the French way of saying Ivory Coast. For us in Nigeria, we will say Ivory Coast. That is Cote d'Ivoire to them, to the French people. The country is like any other colonized nation, just like Nigeria. So, but it's even more interesting to know that Cote d'Ivoire became a nation before Nigeria. It will take 2 months before Nigeria got on board. Cote d'Ivoire had a president, Houphouët Boigny, that ruled for nearly 30 years. Ruled the country for nearly 30 years. And because of him, Cote d'Ivoire now has 2 capitals. They have a political capital and they have an economic capital. Houphouët Boigny came from Yamoussoukro. Yamoussoukro is the capital of Cote d'Ivoire, politically. But more people know Abidjan, which is the economic capital of Cote d'Ivoire. It's just like saying we have Abuja, where we have the National Assembly and our seat of government, and then you have Lagos, which is the economic hub of Nigeria. So they have the same thing in Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire is located on the south coast of West Africa. It borders Guinea and Liberia to the west, Burkina Faso and Mali to the north, Ghana to the east, and the Gulf of Guinea, which is the Atlantic Ocean, to the south. Before they were colonized, just like any other African country, they have the Guyamin, the Kong Empire, and the Baduli. These are local groups before a protectorate of France was created in 1843. I try to, when I look at African countries, I look at them in Paris for 2 weeks, Nigeria. Well, our own history is 1861. our contact with the British. The year was 1843 when they contacted the French. And so, in the scramble for Africa, France Cote d'Ivoire was donated to France. And the language that is general, the way we speak English, and is the way they speak French in Cote d'Ivoire. So they have local languages that they speak, but centrally, everybody speak French. I was saying that their leader, Ofebweni, was in power for 3 years. And one significant thing that Ofebweni did, the country is mostly Christian. Not only Christian, they are Catholics. The biggest basilica, the Catholic basilica in the world, is located in Cote d'Ivoire. In that Ofebweni's village. It's bigger than the one in Rome. There's no big cathedral like it anywhere in the world. And I remember very well that there was a lot of criticism to say, why would an African country, poor, build a monumental basilica? Ofebweni has his reasons. It cost them a lot of money to do. They, for a long time, they operated a colonial constitution. You know how it is with colonialism, where whatever they do comes from France. In 2000, after they had a coup d'etat in 1999, they adopted a new constitution. Just like Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire is a republic, sense that the president has powers, executive powers, with which he rules. It's not like the French, who have a president and a prime minister. They have presidents only. For 33 years, Ofebweni was totally in control. It was after his death that they started having changes of personnel in Cote d'Ivoire. The economy of Cote d'Ivoire, which Richard will discuss later in detail, is based on cocoa and coffee. In fact, Cote d'Ivoire is the largest producer of cocoa in the world. The same way we say our own mainstay is oil. Cocoa is their mainstay. Like I said, the official language is French. The economy, like our own, is largely market-based, heavily on agriculture. They do cash holder production, which is very prominent. So, from everybody, most people are farmers, and cocoa is the mainstay. So you farm cocoa, and they sell it, and they now earn foreign exchange. Currently, Cote d'Ivoire sits on 124 square meters, 124,502 square meters. You will know that pales into significance if you put that together. No, if you compare that to us, we have another space. The only country in Africa that even compares to us in space is Mali, but they don't have the number to go with their space. We have the number, and we have the space. All of us know that. Well, Cote d'Ivoire plays. It's like any other African country, basically, except for the language that changed, that's French. If you think if you're in Cote d'Ivoire, to organize in type of villages like us, if you go there, you think that you are. But you see, because of the colonial structure, their own colonial structure is different from ours. The French basically adopted citizens of their colonial areas as if they are Frenchmen, unlike the British. So if you were French, if you are an Ivorian, and you marry a French woman, you are basically like a French citizen. They treated their colonized people better than the British treated us. Didi Drogba, which all of us know, is Ivory Coast's most famous son. in football. He wore several caps for Cote d'Ivoire and helped Cote d'Ivoire win 2 African Cup of Nations Cups. But it's not the only footballer. there are 2 Tory that we know who is also from Cote d'Ivoire. Like I said, Didi Drogba captained the national team for 8 years, within which they won 2 AFCON games. What is interesting is, Richard had mentioned that economically, Cote d'Ivoire seems to do better than us. And you ask yourself, what is the difference? The difference, if you ask me, is in their leadership. We in Nigeria, we fought a war, the Biafran war, for many months, 30 months. Yeah. They are fought 2. In fact, in one of their fights, the fight divided Ivory Coast into 2. But they have typically made up that you will not notice that level of conflict. It's also interesting to know that Cote d'Ivoire is the 4th largest nation in Africa, with 4.7 million people. So when you see that the 4th is having that number, you now see how big Nigeria is at 280 million. So see them coming close, but in that close, it is like a wide bet, the gulf between Nigeria and a lot of African countries. But the leadership in Cote d'Ivoire is what has given a difference in what I will call the economy, what the ordinary citizen of Ivory Coast gains above us. Consistently, their GDP has outranked us. And one significant thing is, a president of Ivory Coast was taken to the ICC, International Criminal Court, but the charges could not be sustained. The charges could not be sustained because that man that was dragged to the ICC had a lot of soldiers loyal to him, and with them he tried to divide the nation. It didn't work, but they reconciled. The current president in Ivory Coast, currently now, who can remember?
Ouattara?
No, it's Laurent Gbagbo. You see Ouattara and Gbagbo now.
No, Gbagbo is the one that went to the ICC.
Good. So the current one now is Ouattara. And Ouattara has been in power for I think about 5 years now.
About 7 now.
Okay, about 7 years, which is like 1 year shy of what Nigeria would normally do for 2 times. If you run 2 times, it is 8 years. So Ouattara has been running for the past 8 years now, 7 years now, soon. So when I was thinking of Liberia, reading up on Liberia, I told Richard, you have leverage when it comes to the area of economy. Richard is the in-house, the different person in-house economic consultant. And I said, when I have given the basic political landscape of Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire, that I will pass the economic side to him. But let us have it in mind that Felix Houphouët-Boigny was in power from 1960 to 1993. So you know how many years that was. Henry Konan Bédié took over from him and was in power to 1999. Robogio was in power from that 1999 to October 2000. He was toppled by the military. But the military were more loyal to Laurent Gbagbo, who took over power and was in power for between 2000 in 2011 when the current president now took over. Their political structure is slightly like what we practice, just that their parliament is not like ours, whereby, in Nigeria, the executive takes care of all and all. In Cote d'Ivoire, it's different. Their parliament has enough power on their own, and I say that because of the long rule of civilians in Cote d'Ivoire. They don't have the kind of long military interregnum as we had in Nigeria. If you take our history totally, you'll see that the army they were in power longer than the civilians. So that's why you keep on, even after how many years now, some people still refer to Nigeria's democracy as nascent, as like it's new. It's not new. We have done over almost 20 years now, so it's not new. But we can't, completely rule out the effect of the long years of military rule.
So on broader across the country, the numbers for Cote d'Ivoire come to between 24 and 25 million. So from that point of view, it is still small compared to Nigeria. That would be about 1/8 of Nigeria's numbers. But I think that if we now take examples from across the world, Singapore is a small country, just a few people. Liechtenstein, 200, 300,000 people. Switzerland, small. Finland, Norway, small. Their countries need good and strong governance. They need, but also, as you rightly noted, more than the individuals that govern, whether they are elected or not, more than the individuals that govern, we also have to pay attention to the institutional capacities. And I think that's where you were talking about the factors like how Cote d'Ivoire is able to sort itself out, after two civil wars of sorts, And I think it also has to do with the fact that there are nations that have foundations, that have, I think one of the issues we have with Nigeria as a country is that when you get into the foundation of Nigeria, it's difficult for you to agree, it's difficult for people to agree that this nation has become a nation. Shoyinka did that paper, when is a nation? Has Nigeria become a nation? Because a nation must have something. The French presence in Cote d'Ivoire was in two areas. One, the way the French ruled the colonies that they had in Africa, they ruled them with a strong hand. They insisted on making them French. The British used things like indirect rule. They gave you some space. For example, in order not to antagonize the Emirs in northern Nigeria, they asked the missionaries, do not cross a certain point between Jeba and Niger states. Do not cross those points. So the missionaries will get to Mokwa, they will get to a few of those areas, that's the British missionaries or the European missionaries, but they could not cross until they now gave permission, I think in 1925 or so, to set up a school, the Western type school in Zaria, which actually has become the first school, Musasa in Zaria, in that sense. So the British opened up the system, you say, in a somewhat ambivalent way. In a sense, they wanted to impose British Western model, but at another point, they also had to be pragmatic in terms of who would pay for it, which was a major factor for them, which is actually a major factor for amalgamating Nigeria together. Who would pay the cost of the new nation? Who would bear the burden, in that sense? And the choice of indirect rule helped them, because you don't have to dismantle all the structures and bring in British government structures at every level and raise, the administrative body, in that sense. So I think we had that. But for Cote d'Ivoire, the French imposed themselves and established a new order. Much of Francophone Africa looks towards France as a matter of course, unlike what you find here. When we go to Yankee, or when we go to Britain and the other nations that we travel to, we do that more out of volition. You want to go, right? And also out of the media images of what those societies are, and of course the stories and the experiences you get. So it's a matter of choice, which is the neo-colonial enterprise, but it's deeper for the Francophone territories. And I think part of what that has done is that, if you notice, for Cote d'Ivoire to solve its civil war issues, the French had to come. French paratroopers came in ensuring that Gbagbo was taken out. So the French presence in itself works in different ways. At a point, it's like a stabilizing factor. Even when we don't want that kind of stabilization. But at another point, it's a destabilizing factor because it comes with its economic burden and its cost issues, and the fact that and these people are no more aspiring to build African societies. For example, in the debate about the common West African currency, you have the Francophone belt and the Anglophone belt. So the Anglophone belt is working towards getting its own currency, but the Francophone already have their CFA. So you now have two blocks. How you are going to weld that together in the next 1, 2, 3 years as the program is going to be interesting, and I think maybe we'll do some other session to address the Anglophone Francophone issues. But I think quite fundamentally, with 25 million people in Cote d'Ivoire, they have a tidy number that can build, just like smaller countries like Mauritius that just have a little over 1 million people, and they are building, in terms of, so it's about vision, it's about governance, getting the right leadership, in place, and then drawing up, making sure that the nation is welded, so that you can keep going. But interestingly for us, from a Nigerian perspective, is the fact that Nigeria still does a lot of business with Cote d'Ivoire. In fact, if you count the regional trading partners that Nigeria has, Cote d'Ivoire is one of the top 3. You have Ghana, of course, naturally there's Benin Republic, but then you have Cote d'Ivoire. And on the ECOWAS corridor, it's also a stretch. Indeed, if you do a high-speed train between Lagos and Abidjan, I'm not sure it will take more than 2 hours to get from here to Abidjan. Maybe maximum 3. That's if you do a high-speed train, But if you use the slower trains, maybe in 8-10 hours, you will get from here to Abidjan. And there's no point why we should not explore that. I think that at the AFDB, ECOWAS, and the African Union levels, there are already discussions about those national communication borders, which the coming of the African Trade Agreement would help. Because if you notice, the way growth and trade is going is the thing they call economies of scale. What do you have? For example, you mentioned cocoa as a major product, in Cote d'Ivoire, a major cash crop, a major crop in Cote d'Ivoire. And one of the things that has helped Cote d'Ivoire's economic growth, in the past 7 years, is the fact that they have, been actively moving from being just a crop farming nation to a semi, processing and middle processing, nation that is adding value, to agricultural produce. And they've done that working on some model that is quite interesting. For example, the 2 principal drivers of modern Cote d'Ivoire in the past 7-8 years, they are economists. The president is an economist. The prime minister is an economist. So the nation is run on a strong economic, dose. Now, so the foremost consideration for most policies, most discussions in Cote d'Ivoire is the economy. And they've done well on that score. They are one of the top three, in the past 2-3 years, they're one of the top three, top five, growth, centers in the whole world, not just in the continent, in the whole world. This year they are doing 7.4, 7.6%, so they are doing, well, because there's a whole lot of focus. And this economic program is, okay, if you contrast that, for example, with the Nigerian program, when President Ouattara came into power, he had an economic blueprint, he had a program, because he had worked for international economic centers. So he came with an economic program. That was his campaign. And he began implementing it immediately. The first week, his team was ready, and they began driving an economic program that had been drawn up. They began selling this program across the world. By the end of 1 year, they had sold it, this economy that was recovering from war. At the end of the second year, they were already doing 7% GDP growth. This is an economy that was coming back from war.
Countries that get it right at leadership level gets it right in their economies. And Cote d'Ivoire has developed the way because their leadership is support with that.
Yeah, I think I agree with him. As a continent, we have to drive strong. I'm proud of the achievement that Cote d'Ivoire has recorded in more recent years in particular, and I think that under the peer review mechanism, other African nations, notably Nigeria, should see how they can draw and grow from these perspectives that we can see in our current experience. Thank you.